By the time the van's headlights sank out and we were swallowed by pines, the cold had the clean taste of metal on your tongue. The lake was a long, dark sheet stitched with moonlight, and the rented cabin crouched over it like it had been waiting all week for us. Porch sagging with good intentions. Fire pit circled by stones in the clearing like a small lunar calendar. I stepped down and felt the night nip the bare skin between my socks and the hem of my shorts, while the opaque tights I'd pulled on for warmth, yes for warmth, but also for me, held the rest of my legs in that even, secret pressure I'd loved since I learned what it was. The tights were matte black and a little glossy where the firelight would find them later. They ran like a shadow that had decided to be helpful. I tugged my cap lower, told myself the outfit was practical, told myself everything I tell myself when I choose the small, honest thing and carry it out into the air. We clattered up the porch like a herd of friendly ghosts. Hannah wrangled the food totes inside with a triumphant grunt. Priya's laugh rang off the beams when she found the light switch, and the cabin blinked awake. A cathedral of rafters and dusty antlers, and couches too soft for their own good. Luis and Marco argued with affectionate exasperation about the gravel turn the GPS nearly dared us to take. Marco's grin was a half moon, hands tucked into his hoodie, breath fogging. I'd had a crush on him for months, the slow kind, a letter folded into smaller and smaller squares in my pocket, the kind that didn't demand anything. It just warmed my hand to know it was there. May drifted through the doorway last, lifting her phone high as if asking the sky for permission. "No bars," she announced, face split by a relieved smile. She was slight in that compact way that looks like it could spring, black hair tucked behind one ear, a knit beanie dusted with frost. She had a way of listening that made you feel like you were telling the truth, even if you'd only planned to flirt with it, and I'd noticed that the first week she joined the team. Around her eyes, laugh lines softened into something generous. She'd once said in an all-hands icebreaker that she collects small silences like beach glass. I'd thought about that for days. Someone who was not me had decided we were starting with cocoa and a bonfire for team bonding, and I liked the idea more than I let on. We unpacked, shuffled rooms, stashed bags. The kitchen smelled like old cedar warming under the hum of a fridge that sounded content to coexist. By the time we spilled back outside, the night had thickened into velvet, and the lake was a mirror that had learned restraint. The fire took with relief, as if it had been cold too. Hannah knelt and coaxed kindling with a breath. Sparks scrambled up like startled insects, then settled into orange faces. Logs fell into conversation with each other and began to glow. Priya wielded a ladle like a queen, filling enamel mugs, white with chipped blue rims, with cocoa that steamed cinnamon and dark chocolate, a little bitter at the edge the way adulthood is. I took my seat on an old camp chair and let the heat fuss at my knees. The tights drank it and redistributed the warmth like good management. I didn't hide them. I stretched my legs out, crossed at the ankle, shorts unapologetically shorts. When the first curious glance slid my way, it didn't feel like a searchlight. It felt like weather. Priya gave an appreciative nod. "Smart," she said, much warmer. And because I had told myself before we arrived that tonight I would not build another closet, because hey, I collect tiny rebellions the way some people collect bottle caps, I let the door stand open when Hannah tipped her chin toward my legs and asked, "Are they comfy?" I always get the scratchy ones. "They're the good kind," I said. My chest felt like a bird had stopped flapping and decided to perch. Opaque for the cold, but I really love sheers and pantyhose too. The way they feel, the way they look, it's like my body lines up better. And they're warm, which is an excellent alibi. The fire snapped like it was clapping once, quietly. There was a beat of silence that wasn't dangerous, just an adjustment, a room changing shape to fit a new piece of furniture it turned out it had been missing. Luis raised his mug. "To the honest legs," he said, and the circle laughed, and it didn't feel like the laughter wore sharp teeth. May's eyes caught the firelight and kept it. "I like that you said that," she murmured. Not performative, like we were on the back step at a party and the house was being loud without needing us. About lining up. What else do you wear when you want that feeling? The question sat gently on my knee. Sometimes sheer tights under trousers, I said. Sometimes a camisole if I'm layering. A skirt when I have the room to be bolder. I'm pan, really. Labels blur, and wearing what feels good is the same kind of truth. The kind I used to tuck away, and then I learned I breathe better when I don't. May smiled with her whole face. I'm excited you said that, she said. All of it. It feels like a dress code for the nervous system. Wear what lets you breathe. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Also, if you ever want to go thrifting, I'm a menace in a bargain bin. I will find you silk where others see polyester plains. The little bird in my chest did a hop. That sounds dangerously perfect, I said. Across the circle, Marco was watching in that steady way he had, not intruding, just there. He caught my eye and gave the smallest nod. You're okay, it said. I'm glad. That's what his nods are like. They carry more than their weight. The confessions loosened the lid on the night. Priya admitted she buys ridiculous socks, rows of tiny planets, tacos, pencils, and wears them under her serious slacks like contraband joy. Luis, attempting nonchalance and failing adorably, confessed to building ships in bottles on his coffee table and leaving them half-finished because they look like dreams, still deciding. Hannah writes letters on paper and plans her week by which mailbox is prettiest. Marco, quiet until he is suddenly not, asked me what I did when someone's face told me I'd confused their idea of me. I told the truth with the tenderness it deserved. Once I hid, now I try to keep going. Either way, I deserved softness. May asked questions like a good lantern. Warm light, no interrogation. She wanted to know my favorite brands, so I told her. Wolford when I could afford to be fancy. Calzedonia when I wanted color. Drugstore shears for a gloss that makes an ordinary Tuesday more bearable. She wanted to know what color makes me feel most like myself. Ink blue, I said without thinking. Or a brown so sheer it's a secret. She pressed her palms to her cheeks in delight. You speak my language, she said. We kept feeding the fire our logs and our small permissions. Someone failed spectacularly at toasting a marshmallow and offered the charred meteor as a sacrifice to the late-night gods. The lake murmured, reconfiguring itself. When the group splintered, Priya and Luis inside for cookie recon, Hannah to set up the vinyl someone had found buried in a cabinet, May stayed. Marco stayed too, hanging back by the woodpile like he belonged to the Orange Shadow Kingdom. The space between the three of us felt like we'd built a delicate bridge in code and were now testing it with careful steps. May shrugged deeper into her jacket and stretched her legs toward the heat. Her boots looked like they'd been on adventures, the leather scuffed in affectionate commas. I like your tights, she said, unapologetic. Not just how they look, which is very good, but how you look in them. Like you're not borrowing yourself. Like you brought your own. I let the words sit in the place you keep compliments you don't want to rush. Thank you, I said. I used to sneak them under baggier layers. I still do sometimes. Tonight felt like a say-it-out-loud night. She nodded, tipping her face toward the smoke. I like guys, she said quietly, and I like women, and I like the word pan because it makes me think of kitchen pans and great breakfasts and the sound of rain, which is to say, a lot of good things. I don't say it at work because I don't feel like answering questions with infographics, but tonight feels like a say-it-out-loud night to me, too. It hit my chest like a hand warm from a mug. I'm glad, I whispered. Me too. And because truth is greedy once it gets a taste, I added, I have a crush on Marco. The fire licked sideways, wind nudged. Marco blinked like he'd felt his name tug a thread. I laughed softly. I also have a crush on the world sometimes. It's messy, being human. I looked at May, at the curve of her mouth, at how utterly herself she was. And I'm already a little in trouble over you. May's laugh was a held note. Good trouble, she said. She looked over to where Marco was pretending to be very interested in stacking wood by size. We can be a constellation, you know? Crushes aren't zero-sum. We just decide what kind of map we want to draw. Marco wandered back with 2 more logs, like a nonchalant deer. He set them near the fire and crouched, letting the heat pinken his cheeks. I like what she said, he put in, almost shy. The constellation thing. Also, I'll always vote for you to wear what makes you feel good, for what it's worth. He shot me a quick, honest smile, then stood and stretched like a cat deciding not to lie in the doorway. I'm going to go make sure Luis doesn't set the stove on flambe, he said, and melted into the cabin's square of light. We were left with the kind of quiet that knows what it's about. The stars above us had decided to show off. May tucked her knees to her chest, resting her chin atop them. The tights whispered when I moved. My body felt like it had slid into alignment, a click you hear only inside. Can I ask something probably too personal? She said. Her eyes stayed on the fire, like we were looking forward together. You can, I said, meaning it. When you put on something, like the tights or a skirt or that ink blue you mentioned, what part of you sighs in relief? Is it your skin, your mind, that kid you were who wanted to wear what would let you jump higher? The question put a hand on my shoulder the way good questions do. I thought about college dance studios and how borrowed tights made my lines make sense, about changing in bathroom stalls and feeling more like me between the tile and the mirror than I felt under fluorescent office lights. All of it, I said. Skin first. Then a part of me I think of as the narrator, the one who's always trying to get the story right. He goes quiet. And the kid, yes, the kid stops holding his breath. It's like tuning an instrument you didn't know you were playing out of tune, and suddenly the room stops buzzing in your teeth. She exhaled, a fog ribbon. That was beautiful, she said. You could read that into a microphone, and I would sit in the dark and say yes 100 times. The logs collapsed with a polite groan. Somewhere in the trees, a branch fell and didn't mind. From inside came a burst of laughter, and the kitchen window spilled yellow on the deck boards like paint. May set her mug down and rubbed her hands together to rehearse a courage I didn't realize I was rehearsing too. Permission to hold your hand? She asked, a small smile at the corner of her mouth. Something in me grew several sizes and also fit perfectly in my chest. Yes, I said. Please. Her fingers were warm and unsure for exactly 2 seconds, then sure. Our hands found a choreography that felt invented and inevitable. The nylon softened the friction, a gloved whisper, and the sensation made me oddly braver, as if the fabric were translating our touch into a language both our nerves loved. We sat like that, in a little tent of amber, and I could feel the beat of my heart against the seam of the tights and against her palm, counting its own astonished seconds. When the cold finally smudged the edges of our heat, we went inside and the cabin gathered us in the way good rooms do. Hannah had found an old Motown record. It crackled out of a tiny speaker like a familiar ghost. Priya bullied us into tasting cookies her aunt had mailed from 3 states away. They tasted like polite butter and secrets. We curled on the couch under a blanket that static clung to everything and pretended to argue about who got the best corner. Marco dropped into the armchair and told a story about breaking a plate in an Airbnb and replacing it with one that very nearly matched, which somehow turned into Luis, announcing he would be building a tiny ship of our weekend, fire and all, and floating it inside a jar of local jam. May shifted closer, her shoulder finding mine with the same careful confidence as our hands had. "Can I?" she began, then laughed like she'd stepped on her own shoelace. "No need for words. This is nice." The blanket pooled across our laps, covering the black of my tights like snow that lets you know the ground is there and warm beneath. We watched the flames in the stone hearth pretend to be a dragon with taxes to file. May's thumb brushed the back of my hand in small, absent pets that felt like being told I was here. I was not a mistake. I had chosen a good body to live in. Later, when people began to say, I should sleep, and then promptly spent half an hour telling doorway stories, May tugged me lightly toward the kitchen, where the window looked out over the lake's dark shoulder. The moon made a lake of silver in the sink. She leaned against the counter, face gentled by the hum of the fridge. "I liked tonight," she said, voice just big enough for the two of us. "I liked you tonight. I like you. And I want to do this in a way that doesn't turn into a story for the holiday party." I nodded, lungs behaving for once. Same. I like slow. I like warm. I don't need to be brave for anyone who isn't us. Her smile started with relief and then found joy and stayed there. "Then," she said, "I can ask this without a drum roll." She looked at my legs and back at my face, not in a way that made my stomach drop, but in a way that made it settle. "Can I kiss you?" The world became very specific. The cinnamon fumes braided with pine, The faint scratch of the cabinet door where someone had carved initials, the press of the waistband snug at my waist like a quiet hand saying steady. "Yes," I said, and the word felt like a green light flipped on in a sleeping town. The kiss was soft and sure and tasted faintly of cocoa. And if there was a violin, it was played by someone who had practiced long enough to make it sound like breathing. No fireworks, just an ember carried carefully from one house to another and not dropped in the snow. When we parted, our foreheads rested together like we were sharing a thought across a small bridge. She breathed out a laugh. "You're trouble," she whispered. "I'm in favor." We slept in the cabin with the windows painting moon shapes on the ceilings, everyone a concert of private noises. I lay in a lower bunk and kept the tights on, because warmth and because I like myself that way. I dreamed of a thrifting aisle where every hanger held something I'd forgotten I wanted, and May's hand kept finding mine between the blouses and the sequins, as if the store itself were arranging coincidences for us. Morning arrived like a soft explanation. Coffee steamed, someone over-buttered toast, voices warmed back into themselves. The lake wore a calmer face. On the back steps, the wood felt cold through my socks, but my legs were a contained weather system, calm and kind. Marco stepped out with his mug and offered me a nod that said happily, "This is good." May appeared with a scarf she admitted she'd knitted badly, but with affection. We walked the path skirting the water, frost crackling like sugar. We didn't talk much. The silence was the one she collects. Gentle as sea glass, palm-worn. At a bend where a birch leaned over like a question, she hooked one finger into my pocket, like she was tying a string between us. We came back to the chaos of sled attempts and Priya's dramatic readings from a book of local ghost stories found in a drawer. Hannah touched my sleeve and with a grin that belonged to old dance teachers said, "The line is good?" And I laughed, because that joke had become a benediction. Luis showed us a jar holding a lopsided tiny hull, and we nodded soberly as if judging a small fleet. Before lunch, the kitchen filled with that premeal hush where people rehearse phone calls and rinse mugs. May stood at the sink in a bright square of winter sun that made dust look like a galaxy. She glanced over her shoulder at me. "You look happy," she said. "I am," I said, surprised at how easy the word was. It's like the background hiss went quiet. She dried her hands on a dish towel with ducks on it and leaned her hip against the counter. "I'm excited by you being excited about you," she said. "Does that sentence make sense?" "It does," I said, and laughed. "And I'm excited that you're excited about my tights," I added, trying the joke on for size. "And other things. We could go thrifting next weekend if you want. Ink blue. Secret browns." Her eyes brightened like the stove had clicked on. "It's a date," she said, then imitated an announcer voice. 2 bargain hunters enter. 2 romantics leave, both wearing superior hosiery. We bumped shoulders, and it felt as normal as buttering toast. Packing up a temporary life is a noisy magic trick. Blankets folded like polite ideas. The fire pit tamped until it sighed. The porch light switched off with a tiny, reluctant click. Before I climbed into the van, I walked back to the circle of stones and pressed my boot in the ash once, leaving a stamp like a signature. We were here. We said it. The night kept it. On the drive back, Marco dozed and listed gently toward the window. May dozed and listed toward me. I let her head settle on my shoulder and watched the trees pass like pages. The tights kept my legs warm and did none of the work of hiding, which is to say, they did exactly what I needed. I thought about how many closets I had carried like spare rooms, heavy and ready to unfold, and how good it felt to travel lighter. Outside, the road unwound its gray ribbon. Inside, my body fit. Monday returned with its predictable coffee and its calendar teeth. We were ourselves again and also new. At 12:16, a message slid into my DMs. From May. "Lunch on the stoop," it said. Quiet part of the party. On the stoop, the building leaned down like it was curious. We split a paper bag of croissants that crackled like frost and watched the city do its complicated dance. She reached over and touched the back of my hand with her fingertips. A small check-in. I turned my palm up. We sat like that, colleagues and something more, letting the afternoon be loud around us without needing to compete. Hannah passed, waving a pair of constellation pattern tights in a crumpled shopping bag and mouthing, 10 out of 10. Priya lifted a trouser leg to show off socks printed with tiny pencils. Luis sent a photo of the ship-in bottle in progress, which tilted like it was listening hard. And we sent him a chorus of emojis that, to be frank, did not capture the worthy seriousness of his endeavor. Marco wandered by with a coffee and stationed himself as a friend does, briefly, warm and uncomplicated. He clapped my shoulder, light, and in his eyes there was no subtraction, only the addition of a new brightness we both recognized. Days stretched. I wore a sheer pair under trousers one Tuesday, a whisper of gloss I kept to myself and also didn't. May and I wandered thrift stores on Saturday mornings, pulling treasures from racks with the zeal of archivists rescuing history. She found me an ink blue slip so soft it had opinions about gravity. I found her a blazer that made her look like the editor of a magazine about good weather. We tried things on and laughed and sometimes went quiet with sudden recognition, the way you do when a mirror offers you a version of yourself you want to keep. We went slow. We went warm. We asked for permission and enjoyed the yeses. If people asked why I smiled at my computer on strange afternoons, I said, "The line is good," and tapped my knee where the fabric sat just so, a private little pat. If someone told a story about their weekend, I listened on purpose, the way May listens. I passed along the permission the night had given me like spare change someone else might need. When it rained, she texted, "Pancakes?" And then a photo of cast iron and a stack so tall it looked haunted. When the sun came back, we took our lunch to the stoop and let the city be weather around us, and our quiet was a beach glass we shared. The bonfire scent hung in my hoodie for days, a stubborn perfume that outlasted the laundry, and every time I smelled it, I was back there with cinnamon cocoa and sparks stitching up the dark, my knees nested together under a blanket, my tights not a hiding place, but an honest one. I keep the memory like a simple tool I can reach for. The lake black and rippled with light, the stones keeping the circle, the small hand finding mine, and asking with so much care, permission? I keep the words we handed each other as if they were mugs, handle first. "Keep going," the night had said in its old low voice. So we did. We did. We kept going. And in the going, we found the version of ourselves we'd been trying on in mirrors for years, and finally saw clearly, warm and right, ready to wear out into the day.